The courthouse was alive with the hum of murmured conversations, the shuffling of papers, and the occasional echo of footsteps against marble floors. It was a place where people came seeking justice, though not everyone left satisfied. Today, the air felt heavier than usual, charged with tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the building. Reporters milled about outside, clutching notebooks and microphones, while inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. All eyes were on Judge Harold Finch, a man whose sharp tongue and questionable ethics had earned him both enemies and allies over the years. At the center of it all stood Karoline Leavitt, a young journalist known for her relentless pursuit of truth. She wasn't just any reporter. She had built her career exposing corruption in high places, often risking her safety to bring stories to light. This time, however, she wasn't writing an article. She was testifying in court. Her target? None other than Judge Harold Finch himself. The case against him was explosive. Allegations of bribery, tampering with legal outcomes, and using his position for personal gain. For weeks, Karoline had worked tirelessly to gather evidence, piecing together fragments of conversations, documents, and recordings that painted a damning picture of Finch's misconduct. Karoline sat nervously in the witness chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore a simple navy blue dress, professional yet understated, as if to remind everyone present that this wasn't about appearances, it was about facts. Across from her, Judge Finch presided over the proceedings with an air of superiority. He was a tall man with thinning gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to bore into anyone who dared challenge him. His face carried the lines of someone who had spent decades in power, but there was also something cold and calculating in his expression. To those who knew him well, Finch was a master manipulator, skilled at twisting situations to his advantage. As the prosecutor began questioning Karoline, Finch leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, wearing a smug smile. He didn't look worried. After all, he had faced accusations before, and each time, he had emerged unscathed. But today felt different. Karoline's voice was steady as she recounted how she had first uncovered hints of Finch's involvement in illegal activities. She described late-night meetings outside dimly lit offices, whispered phone calls intercepted through careful investigation, and financial records that pointed to suspicious transactions. "I obtained audio recordings," Karoline explained, pulling out a small digital recorder from her bag. These recordings capture conversations between Judge Finch and Victor Lang, a businessman accused of embezzlement. In these discussions, Judge Finch explicitly agrees to rule in Lang's favor. In exchange for monetary compensation, Finch's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. He waved a dismissive hand, cutting off the prosecutor mid-sentence. "Your Honor," he said, addressing the presiding judge, "this is nothing more than hearsay. Miss Leavitt has no credibility here. She's a journalist, not a trained investigator. How can we trust anything she says?" The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Finch's words hanging in the air. Karoline stiffened, feeling the sting of his insult, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she met his gaze head-on, her green eyes unwavering. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she replied calmly, "the evidence speaks for itself. I may be a journalist, but my methods are thorough and transparent. If you'll allow me to play the recording, before—" "She could finish," Finch interrupted again, his tone dripping with condescension. "Oh, please, spare us the theatrics. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? A little girl playing detective because she read too many spy novels." His laughter echoed through the courtroom, drawing nervous glances from the spectators. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others exchanged furtive looks, unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. Karoline's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. She had expected resistance, even hostility, but Finch's blatant disrespect caught her off guard. Still, she reminded herself why she was here, not for validation or applause, but to ensure that justice prevailed. Taking a deep breath, she pressed play on the recorder. The courtroom went still as Finch's voice filled the space, unmistakable and incriminating. "You'll get your verdict," Finch's recorded voice said smoothly. "Just make sure the funds are transferred by Friday. We wouldn't want any complications. The impact was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and even the presiding judge raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. Finch's face turned red, veins bulging in his neck as he slammed his fist on the bench. "This is outrageous," he bellowed. "Completely fabricated. Someone must have doctored that recording." But Karoline wasn't finished. She reached into her bag once more, producing a stack of printed emails and bank statements. Each document corroborated the claims made in the recording, leaving little room for doubt. As she laid them out on the table, Finch's demeanor shifted from anger to panic. He glanced around the room, searching for support, but found none. Even his own attorney avoided meeting his gaze. Throughout the chaos, one person watched intently. From the sidelines, Ethan Cole, a rookie bailiff stationed near the entrance. Ethan was young, barely in his mid-20s, with sandy blonde hair and a quiet confidence that belied his inexperience. He had only been working at the courthouse for a few months, but he had already developed a keen sense of observation. Something about Finch's behavior struck him as odd. Not just the obvious signs of guilt, but the way Finch kept glancing toward the door, as if planning an escape. Ethan's instincts told him this wasn't going to end quietly. As Finch continued to rage and deny the evidence, Ethan moved closer to the front of the room, positioning himself strategically. He didn't know exactly what he planned to do, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't stand by and watch injustice unfold. Not today. For Karoline, the battle was far from over. Despite the mounting evidence, Finch was fighting back with everything he had, relying on intimidation and manipulation to derail the proceedings. Yet as she looked out at the sea of faces watching her, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the day when the scales tipped in favor of truth. And if not, she vowed to keep fighting until they did. The courtroom remained tense, the outcome uncertain, but one thing was clear. The wheels of justice had begun to turn, and there was no stopping them now. The courtroom was filling up again, the buzz of conversation growing louder as people returned to their seats. The recess had done little to ease the tension. If anything, it had only heightened the anticipation. Karoline sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could feel the weight of the phone in her pocket, its presence a reminder of what she and Ethan had risked to secure the evidence. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, focusing on the task ahead. Judge Harold Finch re-entered the room with his usual air of arrogance, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. He glanced around the courtroom, his gaze lingering on Karoline for just a moment longer than necessary. She met his stare without flinching, her expression calm but resolute. Finch's lips curled into a faint sneer before he turned his attention back to the presiding judge. "Let's get this charade over with," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The prosecutor resumed questioning Karoline, asking her to elaborate on the evidence she had presented earlier. As she recounted the details, Finch grew increasingly agitated. His fingers drummed against the bench and his jaw clenched visibly. When Karoline mentioned the financial records linking him to Victor Lang, Finch leaned forward, his voice sharp and cutting. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "These so-called documents are meaningless without context. You're grasping at straws, Miss Leavitt." Karoline didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she simply nodded toward the judge overseeing the case. "If it pleases the court, I'd like to present additional evidence that directly ties Judge Finch to the bribery scheme." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, holding it up for everyone to see. On the screen was a photograph of one of the documents she and Ethan had retrieved from Finch's chambers, a bank statement showing a large transfer of funds from Victor Lang's account to an offshore entity registered under Finch's name. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as spectators craned their necks to get a better look. Finch's face turned, pale, his composure cracking for the first time. He shot to his feet, pointing an accusatory finger at Karoline. "This is outrageous. That evidence is fabricated. It has no credibility whatsoever." The presiding judge raised a hand, silencing Finch. "Order in the court," he said sternly. Turning to Karoline, he asked, "How did you obtain this document?" Karoline hesitated for a split second, aware that revealing the truth about breaking into Finch's chambers would land her and Ethan in serious trouble. But she couldn't afford to lose momentum now. "Your Honor," she began, choosing her words carefully. "This document was provided to me by a confidential source who wishes to remain anonymous. Its authenticity can be verified through independent analysis." Finch scoffed, throwing up his hands in frustration. "Anonymous sources? This is absurd. You can't seriously expect anyone to take this seriously." But the damage had already been done. The presiding judge studied the photograph closely, his brow furrowing as he examined the details. "It does appear to corroborate the allegations," he said finally, his tone measured. "We'll need to investigate further, but for now this evidence cannot be ignored." Finch's panic escalated. He glanced toward the door, clearly considering making a run for it. But before he could act, Ethan stepped forward from his position near the entrance. The young bailiff had been watching the proceedings unfold with growing unease, knowing that they were running out of time. If Finch managed to leave the courtroom, he might disappear altogether, or worse, destroy more evidence. "Your Honor," Ethan interjected, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I believe we should detain Judge Finch until the validity of this evidence can be confirmed. Given the gravity of the accusations, it would be irresponsible to allow him to leave." Finch whirled around, his face contorted with rage. "Detain me? On what grounds? This is preposterous. Who do you think you are, boy?" Ethan didn't flinch. He locked eyes with Finch, his expression unwavering. "I'm someone who took an oath to uphold the law, Your Honor. And right now, the law demands answers." For a moment, Finch seemed speechless, his mask of superiority slipping completely. Then, with a growl of frustration, he lunged toward the door, shouting orders at the other bailiffs. "Stop him!" he barked, though none of them moved. They exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to follow his commands or respect the authority of the presiding judge. Ethan sprang into action, blocking Finch's path with surprising speed. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Finch sputtered in disbelief, his face turning red with fury. "You wouldn't dare." Finch spat, jabbing a finger at Ethan. "Do you have any idea who I am? You'll regret this." Ethan didn't respond. With practiced efficiency, he secured the handcuffs around Finch's wrists, ignoring the older man's protests. The courtroom erupted into chaos as spectators gasped and whispered among themselves. Some cheered quietly while others looked on in stunned silence. Finch struggled against Ethan's grip, but the young bailiff held firm, his resolve unshaken. The presiding judge banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. When the noise finally subsided, he addressed the room in a grave tone. "Judge Harold Finch, you are hereby placed under arrest pending further investigation into these allegations. Bailiff Cole, please escort him to holding until proper arrangements can be made." As Ethan led Finch away, the disgraced judge continued to rant and rave, his voice echoing down the hallway. "This isn't over," he shouted, twisting his head to glare at Karoline. "You'll pay for this, Leavitt. Mark my words." Karoline watched him go, her pulse racing, but her expression calm. She knew Finch wasn't bluffing. He would stop at nothing to retaliate. But she also knew that today marked a turning point. For years, Finch had operated above the law, using his power to shield himself from consequences. Now, thanks to her determination and Ethan's courage, his reign of corruption was coming to an end. Once Finch was out of sight, the courtroom fell silent, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. The presiding judge adjourned the session temporarily to review the new evidence, instructing the prosecution and defense teams to prepare their arguments for the next phase of the trial. As people began filing out, reporters swarmed Karoline once again, eager for comments. This time she allowed herself a small smile. "I'm grateful to everyone who supported me throughout this process," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Today proves that even the most powerful individuals aren't immune to accountability. Justice may be slow, but it always finds a way." Back in the holding area, Ethan stood guard outside Finch's cell, his mind replaying the events of the past hour. He had never imagined himself taking such a bold stand, especially against someone as formidable as Finch. Yet, as he reflected on what he had done, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. For the first time in his career, he truly understood what it meant to serve justice, not just as a job, but as a calling. Karoline found him later, standing alone in the courthouse corridor. She approached cautiously, her gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, extending a hand. "I couldn't have done this without you." Ethan shook her hand, returning her smile. "We make a good team," he replied. "And we're not done yet. There's still work to be done to ensure Finch faces the full extent of the law." Karoline nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Agreed. But for now, let's take a moment to appreciate what we've accomplished. Today we reminded people that no one is untouchable, not even a judge." As they parted ways, the sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. The day had been grueling, filled with tension and uncertainty. But, as Karoline walked toward her car, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Change was possible, she realized, not because of grand gestures or heroic acts, but because ordinary people dared to stand up when it mattered most. And sometimes, that was enough to tip the scales in favor of justice. The courtroom was still buzzing with tension as the presiding judge called for a recess. Spectators whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief while others nodded approvingly at Karoline's courage. Despite the overwhelming evidence she had presented, Judge Harold Finch remained defiant, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. He stormed off the bench, muttering under his breath about media theatrics and false accusations. As he disappeared into his chambers, the room began to empty, leaving only a few stragglers behind. Karoline stepped down from the witness stand, her legs feeling heavier than they had in years. She knew the fight wasn't over. Finch would do everything in his power to discredit her and suppress the truth. But for now, she allowed herself a brief moment of relief. Outside the courtroom doors, reporters swarmed around her, eager for quotes and reactions. Flashbulbs popped and microphones were thrust toward her face, but Karoline held up a hand, signaling that she needed space. "I'll answer questions later," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the noise. "Right, now I need a minute." As she turned away, Ethan Cole approached cautiously. His uniform marked him as a bailiff, but there was something different about him, a quiet intensity in his hazel eyes that set him apart from the others. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening before speaking softly. "Miss Leavitt, can I talk to you for a moment?" Karoline hesitated. She had learned the hard way not to trust easily, especially in situations like this where enemies could pose as allies. But something about Ethan's tone struck her as genuine. Nodding slowly, she followed him to a quiet corner near the courthouse windows. The sunlight streamed in, casting golden streaks across the tiled floor. For a brief moment, the chaos of the trial seemed distant. "I heard what happened in there," Ethan began, his voice low but steady. "You're taking a big risk going after someone like Finch. He doesn't play fair." Karoline crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "What do you want, Officer Cole?" she asked bluntly. "If you're here to warn me off, save your breath. I'm not backing down." Ethan shook his head quickly. "No, nothing like that. I think you should know something." He paused, glancing over his shoulder to ensure they were alone. "Earlier today, before the hearing started, I overheard Finch talking to one of his clerks. They were planning to destroy key documents related to the case, evidence that could tie him directly to those bribes." Karoline's eyes widened slightly, though she tried to mask her surprise. "Do you know where these documents are?" she asked, leaning in closer. Ethan nodded. "They're locked in a file cabinet in Finch's chambers. He keeps them in a hidden compartment behind a false panel. If we don't act fast, they'll be gone by the time the session resumes." Karoline exhaled sharply, running a hand through her dark hair. This changed everything. Without that evidence, proving Finch's guilt beyond a shadow of a doubt would become nearly impossible. She looked at Ethan, weighing her options. Could she trust him? He was putting himself at great risk by sharing this information. One wrong move and both of them could end up in serious trouble. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You barely know me. Ethan shrugged, a flicker of determination crossing his features. Because it's the right thing to do. I didn't sign up to protect corrupt judges, I signed up to uphold the law. And if Finch gets away with this, it'll make a mockery of everything I believe in. He met her gaze squarely, his resolve unwavering. Besides, you've already done most of the heavy lifting. All I'm asking is for a chance to help finish the job. Karoline studied him for a long moment, searching for any hint of deception. What she saw instead was sincerity and desperation. Desperation not for personal gain, but for justice. Slowly, she nodded. All right, she said, but we need to be careful. If Finch finds out what we're doing, he won't hesitate to crush us. Together, they huddled close, sketching out a plan. Ethan explained the layout of the courthouse, pointing out blind spots where security cameras didn't reach. He suggested using the maintenance hallway to access Finch's chambers unnoticed. Karoline listened intently, jotting down notes on a small pad. When they were satisfied with their strategy, Ethan checked his watch. We've got about 20 minutes before the recess ends, he said. That should be enough time to get in and out if we move quickly. With a final nod, they parted ways. Karoline slipped into the restroom to collect herself, splashing cold water on her face to calm her nerves. Her mind raced with possibilities. If they succeeded, they might secure the smoking gun needed to bring Finch down once and for all. But failure meant more than just losing the case. It meant endangering lives, including her own. Still, she reminded herself why she had chosen this path in the first place, to give a voice to those who couldn't speak for themselves. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to his post, pretending to go about his duties as usual. On the surface, he appeared calm, but inside his heart pounded with adrenaline. He had never done anything like this before, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Yet as he watched Finch pace angrily in his chambers, he felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't just about stopping a corrupt judge. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it scared him. When the coast was clear, Ethan signaled to Karoline, who emerged from the shadows near the stairwell. They exchanged a quick glance before slipping into the maintenance corridor. The narrow passage smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Every sound seemed amplified, making Karoline hyper-aware of each step they took. Ethan led the way, his movements cautious but deliberate. At the end of the hall, they reached a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Beyond it lay Finch's private chambers. Ethan pulled out a master key, his hands trembling slightly as he inserted it into the lock. With a soft click, the door swung open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with shelves lined with legal books and stacks of papers scattered across the desk. In the corner stood the file cabinet Ethan had mentioned. Moving swiftly, he knelt beside it and pressed against the side panel until it popped loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside were several folders stuffed with documents. Karoline wasted no time flipping through the pages. Her eyes widened as she recognized names and figures that matched the transactions she had uncovered earlier. These weren't just random files. They were proof of Finch's crimes, meticulously recorded and now within their grasp. "This is it," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "This is exactly what we need." Working together, they photographed the documents with Karoline's phone, ensuring they had digital copies as backup. Once finished, they carefully replaced the folders and resealed the compartment. As they prepared to leave, Ethan froze, hearing footsteps approaching from the main hallway. "Someone's coming," he hissed, grabbing Karoline's arm. Panic surged through her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Together, they ducked behind a large bookshelf, holding their breath as the door creaked open. A clerk entered, humming softly to himself as he retrieved a stack of papers from the desk. After what felt like an eternity, he left, closing the door behind him. Only then did Karoline let out a shaky sigh of relief. "That was too close," she murmured, clutching her phone tightly. "Let's get out of here before anyone else shows up." Ethan nodded, leading the way back to the maintenance corridor. By the time they emerged into the bustling hallway, the recess was nearly over. Spectators were filing back into the courtroom, unaware of the drama that had unfolded mere feet away. Karoline and Ethan shared a fleeting look of triumph before parting ways, each returning to their respective roles. As Karoline took her seat in the gallery, she couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The evidence was safe, and Finch's downfall was closer than ever, but she also knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The courtroom may have been a stage, but the real battle for justice was far from over. The fallout from Judge Harold Finch's arrest spread like wildfire. By the time Karoline stepped outside the courthouse, reporters were swarming around her, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward her face. She had known this moment would come, knew that exposing someone as powerful as Finch would make headlines, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer intensity of the media frenzy. Her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, each one a new message or request for an interview. For a brief moment she felt overwhelmed, but then she reminded herself why she was here. This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about justice. Karoline took a deep breath and addressed the crowd, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Today, we witnessed something important," she began, pausing to let her words sink in. "We saw that even those who wield great power are not above the law. Judge Finch's actions have betrayed the trust of the people he was meant to serve. But this is just the beginning. There's still much work to be done to ensure accountability and transparency within our judicial system." Her statement was met with applause from some members of the crowd, while others nodded solemnly. As she turned to leave, a young woman approached her, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," the woman said softly. "My brother went to jail because of Finch's corruption. I never thought anyone would stand up to him." Karoline placed a comforting hand on the woman's shoulder, her heart swelling with determination. Stories like this were exactly why she had pursued this case so relentlessly. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Ethan Cole faced scrutiny of his own. News of his role in arresting Finch had reached the higher-ups, and they wasted no time calling him into a meeting. The head bailiff, a stern man named Mr. Grayson, sat behind a desk, his arms crossed as he stared at Ethan. "Explain yourself, Cole," he demanded, his tone sharp. "You overstepped your authority today. What were you thinking?" Ethan stood, tall, meeting Grayson's gaze without hesitation. "I was thinking about doing my job, sir," he replied calmly. "Judge Finch was attempting to flee the courtroom after evidence of his crimes surfaced. It was my duty to prevent that." Grayson leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan carefully. He didn't look angry anymore, just thoughtful. "You understand the risks you took, don't you? Going against someone like Finch isn't something most people would do." "I'm aware of the risks," Ethan admitted. "But I also believe in what I did. If we're going to claim that the law applies equally to everyone, then we need to prove it. That starts with holding people accountable, no matter how powerful they are." To Ethan's surprise, Grayson nodded slowly, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Not many rookies would have the guts or the integrity to pull off what you did today. You've got potential, Cole. Don't waste it." As Ethan left the office, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had expected criticism, maybe even punishment, but instead he found himself earning respect, not just from his superiors, but from his colleagues as well. Fellow bailiffs patted him on the back, congratulating him for standing up to Finch. One of them even joked, "Guess you're the hero of the day, huh?" Ethan smiled, though he didn't see himself as a hero. To him, he had simply done what was right. Back at her apartment, Karoline spent hours reviewing the evidence she and Ethan had gathered. She knew the fight wasn't over yet. Finch still had resources at his disposal, and his lawyers would do everything in their power to discredit the case. But she also knew that public opinion was shifting. Social media had exploded with reactions to Finch's arrest, with hashtags like #Justice for All and "No More Corruption" trending nationwide. People were outraged, demanding reforms to prevent similar abuses of power in the future. Karoline decided to capitalize on this momentum. She drafted an article detailing every aspect of the investigation, the late-night stakeouts, the risky confrontations, and the painstaking effort to piece together Finch's web of corruption. She included quotes from victims of Finch's misconduct, as well as statements from experts who emphasized the importance of accountability in the judiciary. When the article went live the next morning, it quickly went viral, sparking discussions across the country. In the days that followed, the pressure mounted on authorities to take action. Lawmakers called for hearings to investigate systemic issues within the court system, while advocacy groups organized rallies to demand change. Karoline attended one such rally, standing alongside ordinary citizens who carried signs reading "Truth over Power" and "Justice Can't Wait." As she listened to speeches from activists and survivors of judicial corruption, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about taking down one bad judge. It was about creating a fairer, more transparent system for everyone. Finch, meanwhile, was far from idle. From his cell, he worked tirelessly to salvage his reputation, hiring a team of high-profile attorneys to challenge the charges against him. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial and obtained illegally, filing motions to have it dismissed. But their efforts only fueled public outrage as leaked documents revealed more details about Finch's dealings with Victor Lang and other shady figures. Victor Lang, desperate to save himself, struck a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for immunity, he agreed to testify against Finch, providing additional evidence that corroborated Karoline's claims. His testimony painted a damning picture of Finch's greed and ruthlessness, leaving little room for doubt about his guilt. During one particularly explosive session, Lang described how Finch had threatened to ruin anyone who dared oppose him. He made it clear that crossing him came with consequences, Lang said grimly. And he wasn't bluffing. The trial dragged on for weeks, with both sides presenting their cases. Finch's lawyers tried to discredit Karoline, accusing her of fabricating evidence and manipulating witnesses. But Karoline remained composed under cross-examination, answering every question with clarity and confidence. When asked about her motivations, she responded simply, "I wanted to give a voice to those who couldn't speak for themselves, that's all." By the time closing arguments rolled around, the jury was visibly moved by the overwhelming evidence against Finch. After deliberating for 2 days, they returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in cheers as Finch was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. Outside, supporters of the case celebrated, chanting slogans and waving banners. Karoline watched from the sidelines, tears welling up in her eyes. Justice had been served, not perfectly, but enough to make a difference. That evening, Karoline met Ethan at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. They sat by the window, sipping coffee as they reflected on everything that had happened. "It feels surreal, doesn't it?" Ethan said, breaking the silence. "I keep expecting to wake up and realize it was all a dream." Karoline chuckled softly. "Tell me about it. For months I doubted whether we'd ever get here. But now, I think we've started something bigger than either of us realized." Ethan nodded, gazing out at the city skyline. "Do you think things will really change? Or will it just go back to business as usual once the headlines fade?" "I don't know," Karoline admitted. "But I do know one thing. We've shown people that it's possible to fight back. Even if the system isn't perfect, there are still ways to hold it accountable. And maybe, just maybe, that'll inspire others to keep pushing for change." As they parted ways later that night, Karoline felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be obstacles, setbacks, and battles yet to fight. But for the first time in a long time, she believed that progress was possible. And sometimes that belief was enough to keep moving forward. The weeks following Judge Harold Finch's conviction brought a wave of change that rippled through the city. The courthouse, once seen as a symbol of injustice and corruption, began to transform into something more hopeful. People who had once feared speaking out now found their voices, encouraged by the courage of Karoline Leavitt and Ethan Cole. Stories of others who had suffered under Finch's ruling started surfacing. Stories of families torn apart, businesses destroyed, and lives ruined. Each tale added fuel to the growing demand for reform within the judicial system. Karoline became a household name, her face appearing on television screens and magazine covers across the country. She wasn't just a journalist anymore, she was a symbol of resistance against corruption. Invitations poured in from universities, advocacy groups, and even government panels, asking her to speak about accountability and transparency. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to step into the spotlight. But then she remembered the young woman who had thanked her outside the courthouse, the one whose brother had been wrongfully imprisoned because of Finch. That memory reminded her of why she had started this journey in the first place. Reluctantly, she agreed to share her story, hoping it might inspire others to take a stand. Her speeches were simple yet powerful. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she would say, standing before crowds of eager listeners. "I simply refused to look away when I saw something wrong. We all have the power to make a difference no matter how small it may seem. Sometimes all it takes is one person saying, 'Enough is enough.'" Ethan, too, found himself thrust into the public eye. Though he preferred to stay behind the scenes, his role in arresting Finch made him a local hero. Colleagues at the courthouse treated him with newfound respect, and strangers often stopped him on the street to thank him. One day, while walking home from work, a group of high school students approached him. "Mr. Cole," one of them said shyly, "we're doing a project on people who fight for justice. Can you tell us what made you decide to stand up to Judge Finch?" Ethan smiled, touched by their enthusiasm. "Honestly," he replied, "I didn't think I had much of a choice. When you see something unfair happening right in front of you, you can either ignore it or try to fix it. I chose to fix it." His words resonated deeply with the students, who left inspired to tackle injustices in their own communities. Despite the praise, both Karoline and Ethan remained grounded. They knew the fight for justice wasn't over, not by a long shot. While Finch's arrest had exposed one corrupt judge, it also highlighted deeper flaws in the system. Bribery and favoritism weren't isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a larger problem. To address these issues, lawmakers introduced new legislation aimed at increasing oversight and transparency in the courts. Public hearings were held to gather input from citizens, and activists worked tirelessly to ensure the proposed reforms wouldn't lose momentum. Karoline threw herself into this next phase of the battle, using her platform to advocate for meaningful change. She wrote articles exposing loopholes that allowed judges like Finch to operate unchecked and interviewed experts who offered solutions. Her reporting became a blueprint for reform, influencing policymakers and sparking debates in legislative chambers. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his work at the courthouse, determined to be part of the solution from within. He volunteered to train new bailiffs on ethics and integrity, sharing lessons he had learned during his brief but impactful career. Their efforts paid off. Within months, several key reforms were implemented. Judges were required to disclose financial records regularly, and independent commissions were established to investigate complaints of misconduct. Cameras were installed in courtrooms to promote transparency, and stricter penalties were introduced for those found guilty of corruption. These changes weren't perfect. They couldn't erase decades of damage overnight, but they represented a step in the right direction. As time passed, life began to settle into a new rhythm for Karoline and Ethan. The media frenzy surrounding Finch's case eventually died down, replaced by quieter victories. Karoline returned to her investigative journalism, though her focus shifted slightly. Instead of chasing scandals, she sought stories of resilience and hope, profiles of individuals and communities working together to create positive change. Her articles reminded readers that while the world was full of challenges, it was also filled with opportunities to make it better. Ethan, meanwhile, embraced his role as a mentor and leader. He took pride in knowing that he had helped set a higher standard for those entering the legal system. On weekends, he joined volunteer programs teaching civics to underserved youth, encouraging them to engage with their communities and hold leaders accountable. Watching young minds light up with curiosity and determination gave him a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. One crisp autumn afternoon, Karoline and Ethan met at their usual cafe. It had become a tradition for them to catch up every few weeks, sharing updates on their respective projects and reflecting on how far they had come. Today, however, there was an air of nostalgia between them. As they sat sipping coffee, Ethan glanced out the window at the bustling streets below. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't taken that chance?" he asked thoughtfully. Karoline paused, considering the question. "All the time," she admitted. "But I don't dwell on it. What matters is that we did take the chance and look where it led us. Sure, the system still has its problems, but we've shown people that change is possible, and that's worth celebrating." Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "You know, I used to think justice was something handed down from above, from judges, lawmakers, people in power. But now I realize it starts with ordinary folks like us, doing what's right even when it's hard." "Exactly," Karoline agreed. "Justice isn't some distant ideal. It's something we build together piece by piece. Every little action counts." They fell silent for a moment, watching the sunlight dance across the pavement. The city felt alive with possibility, its energy infectious. For all its flaws, it was a place where dreams could still take root, if given the chance. Later. That evening, as Ethan walked home, he stopped at a park overlooking the skyline. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink. He thought about everything that had transpired since that fateful day in the courtroom. Arresting Finch had been a bold move, yes, but it was only the beginning. Real change took time, patience, and persistence. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, Ethan felt ready to face whatever came next. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos from the rally Karoline had attended weeks earlier. One image caught his eye, a sea of people holding signs that read "Justice for All." It was a reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. Across the country, countless others were standing up, speaking out, and demanding better. Together they formed a movement, one that refused to let corruption go unchecked. As Ethan tucked his phone back into his pocket, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Justice wasn't just a destination, it was a journey driven by courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that even the smallest acts of bravery could spark monumental change. And for Ethan Cole, that journey was far from over.